Wednesday night in Ferguson, Missouri, another round of standoffs spoke to the simmering violence that could erupt at any moment in the Michael Brown shooting case. Grand jury findings are leaking out, and they are not what one side in this discourse wants to hear, despite it possibly being the cold, hard truth. And the truth is what remains at the core of a very fragile peace. Let's welcome to MidPoint. He is the chair of the science department at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City. His specialty, forensic DNA analysis, and he's considered a leading expert in the field of forensic science. Dr. Larry Kobilinsky joins us. Doctor, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Doctor, from what you have had a chance to read and follow up thus far on what has been leaked from the grand jury regarding the Michael Brown autopsy, is there any question in your mind that all of this does seem to be consistent with the evidence that we currently have at hand?
Well, there are contradictions somewhat to some of the eyewitness testimony. There are differences of opinion, and that's because people have different perceptions of what they see. But let's talk about the hard evidence. We do have gunshot residue on the thumb and palm of the right hand of Michael Brown. That would argue that there was a struggle for the gun. Michael Brown's blood is also on that gun. It appears to me that the police officer, Wilson, actually drew the gun out of his holster. There was following a struggle. That would explain the shot that penetrated the palm. So that is a very critical piece of evidence because it supports what the police officer's accounting is of the events that occurred. The other evidence is there were 3 shots to the head. I'm sorry, 3 wounds of the head, but that can be explained because of entry and exit wounds. So in fact, Dr. Bodden, who did the autopsy on behalf of Michael Brown's family, indicated that there were at least six bullets that hit Michael Brown.
He got it wrong, didn't he? He got it wrong.
Well, not necessarily, no, because there were a bullet can cause 2 holes and even 3 holes. There's an entrance and an exit from the same bullet, from the same round. And once it exits, it can enter again. So, in other words, 9 wounds to the body can still be done by 6 bullets. So I wouldn't say he got it wrong. But I think that the autopsy report argues that Michael Brown was facing the officer when he was shot. And the only question in my mind that remains is whether or not Michael Brown's hands, arms, were up in the air or down.
Speak to that specifically, if you will, because is it not then if the hands are up, and I'm making that right now, that if the hands are up,
Yes.
you usually have palms facing forward, but correct me if I'm wrong, what they're seeing is that if the bullet came in at a specific angle, it would seem to indicate that the hands would have to have been turned backward and the back of the hand facing the officer. Is that correct?
Well, it's not quite that simple. I think there are people that looked at the autopsy report and they have different conclusions. And I think the reason for that is that the arm is not stationary like the torso, for example. An arm can move and take on different configurations. You can rotate it. You can move it up and down and sideways. And in fact, the arm, with sequential rounds hitting the arm can take on different positions. So I think the answer is not clear as to whether his arms were up or not. I think that is going to be a continuing bone of contention.
I have about a minute left here. Then let me ask, you mentioned Dr. Michael Baden earlier, who had done one of the preliminary findings, if you will, at the behest of the family. Is it fair to say that what we are hearing now and what we heard at that time indicates that many of those findings that were not done by the city, the county, the state, the officials, were indeed premature and should not be taken as complete 100% fact?
Well, look, when you have pathologists looking at a body in an autopsy, they see the same thing, but they can interpret things differently. And the issue has a lot to do with trajectory and the explanation of entry and exit wounds. I think that there is essentially consistency between the Bodden autopsy and the autopsy done by the county medical examiner in St. Louis. I don't see major outstanding differences. I think the main point here is that the evidence that we do have from the autopsy shows that there was a close-in struggle for the gun. The gun went off in the car, perhaps twice, according to the FBI. There's gunshot residue in the vehicle. It hit Mr. Brown once. It missed once. And so, I think that thus far, Mr. Police Officer Wilson's story is consistent with the autopsy report.
All right. We'll have to leave it there for the moment. Dr. Larry Kobilinsky, thank you so much for being on the air. I'm sure we're going to talk again very soon.
Sure. Thank you so much.
After the break, Dick Morris weighs in on the key midterm races and what happens when the Donald has words for Mitt Romney. It's on MidPoint.